Insert teaser here on today's Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. And the word of today is irrational exuberance. Hi, my name is Charles Ray Dawson. This is the Unnamed Real Estate Podcast. I am the associate broker and residential sales manager for ProStar Realty, and this is episode 61. So, I had continuation on this week and stuff like that. This morning is the last day of March 31st, and which means we're at the end of the first quarter, and a whole bunch of information tends to come out on the ends of the quarters, right? And the news today that blew up my inbox was from the feds, all right? Particularly the Dallas Federal Bank. Now, a lot of people don't know that you have the Federal Reserve, all right? And the Federal Reserve has separate little sub banks, all right? So you have like San Francisco, I think there's one in Kansas City, and there's also one in Dallas. And each one of these individual reserves gets assigned by the Federal Reserve individual studies and everything. Hey, it's my sister sending me random pictures. This is what happens when you don't put your phone on mute. So, the individual reserve banks get assigned studies to do, and so some of them will come out and do. Some of them will come out and say, "Hey, we're in charge of doing unemployment." Other ones will come out and say, "We're doing monetary holdings, whatnot." Dallas apparently got stuck in the barrel for doing real estate this time around, and they came out and they threw up a warning order, and it's like, hey, we might be going into a bubble because we're starting to see irrational exuberance in the housing market. So that, of course, all the people who have been proclaiming doom and gloom for the last 6-9 months or years, decade, are all pointing at this going, see, we told you so. And there's lots of people going, oh no, you can't make more land, scoffing at it. So we'll give you the information. You can make the decision what you see going on. And I might even tell you my opinion at the end of the day. So, long story short, all right, everybody knows house prices have gone up. I've seen two separate numbers about what the national median home price is, but they both are saying that we're over $500,000 nationally. That's a big plus. Now, we also know that the interest rates have spiked. They have been going up because of responses to both the Fed raising their rates, various things happening in the bond market, and of course inflation, which is kicking everything off, which is, as we know, going to be reducing the amount of people who can actually qualify for that home that you're trying to sell for $500,000, because the interest rates are a major part of your monthly costs, all right? And so there's some concern that we're going to start seeing, reduction of demand. Now, supply is still low, right? We all know supply is low, but, markets are all about supply and demand, right? And if we start seeing, here's supply mucking around down here on the bottom, here's demand up here. When we see that start coming down, all right, you're going to start seeing supply come up simply for the fact that as that demand lowers, all right, houses aren't going to be sold as fast. They're still going to sell, all right? They're just not going to sell on that first weekend or that first day, all right? Had a client of mine who may be watching, hi guys, who texted me yesterday saying they wanted to see a house on Friday. All right. Yesterday was Wednesday. Friday is tomorrow is the time I'm recording this. This morning I logged into Armless, took a look at that property, and it's already gone pending. That's a one-day sale. Don't know whether or not that house is already under contract or there was already contracts out there. Maybe it was in a coming soon status. Maybe there's somebody in-house that inside that brokerage that had a buyer for that, and a lot of brokerages will do a coming soon email to all of their agents on the inside, going, hey, here's some properties that are coming up, and somebody got a really quick first look on it. I'm also seeing properties out there that are just send us the offer and then you get to see the house. All right. Basically, they're actively saying out there, hey, blind bid on this house. So that's where we're at on our market currently. So let's go to the numbers real quick, and I'll explain this a little bit more. So, all right. So what we got here, and this is numbers I ran about 8:30 yesterday morning, all right, on March 30th, all right. Our actives this week are 4,487, which is up 101. That's our second week of actives starting to come up after going down the entire year. All right, we saw the same thing happen last year. All right, of those, 2,442 of them were new listings just coming in within the last week, which is up 127s. All right, our pendings were 2,023, which is down 20. Our under contracts looking for backups are at 1,094, which is up 8. And our contracts with the buyer's contingency was at 92, which is up 12. We had 2,134 closings last week, which is down 46. And our coming soon is 1,096. Now, March 30th is an interesting number for closings and stuff like that because we still have today, the 31st. A whole bunch of escrow officers are pulling their hair out right now trying to get all these closings done. But to have the bulk of the last week and still showing down closings, that's interesting. You can actually say that that's just because of the lack of inventory out there because we have closings that you see over here, all right, lag pendings by about 30 to 45 days. So if we were to pull up the big spreadsheet and everything and look at that, we would probably have seen pendings go down a bit 30 days ago, which is reflecting in this. 30 days ago, we had less inventory than we have today. So, you know, that's, so don't give too much, oh, look, closings are down. All right, we still have 1,096 coming soon listings. Those are listings that are getting ready to come on the market and have buyers be able to look at them. They will show up active. And once again, sometimes those coming soons miraculously show up active for about 35 seconds and automatically go to pending. Those are coming soon air quote listings that have already been sold by the agents. And they're just punching it into the system to make sure they get the credit for it on ARM list. So, inventory starting to creep back up just like it did last year. We're still above last year's numbers when it comes to active where we were this time last year. But interest rates are coming down. What the main key thing that I want to watch, right? As you can tell by the way I put these arrows in here, when a property goes into under contract looking for backups, that is normally solely on the listing agent's decision about whether or not they want to solicit backup offers. If they do not feel comfortable about the offer they got, right, they'll put it UCB. I personally do that if I have an offer that comes in and it's being financed through a bank and I have some concerns about the appraisal or I have some concerns about the inspection. All right, I'll be looking for backups. The two properties I was talking about to you earlier, the one that just came off the market for Friday, and I was going to look at it on Friday, but they just came off this morning. And the other one that was the sight unseen offer, both of those went straight to pending. All right. An agent probably wouldn't go from active straight to pending unless they had an offer that was cash, so we don't have to worry about the appraisal contingency. I don't know if guys can hear those sirens, but it sounds like a new house just went up for sale down the street and everybody's rushing to get there. So with the appraisal contingency waived because it's cash or just straight up waived, you can go straight to pending on that. And the other thing is these buyers might have waived the inspection. That's another major punch out, right? So watching two houses suddenly go pending that I was personally tracking is just an interesting little data point to rock around back there. So we're in the spring fling. This is where it all happens. I'd almost call it March Madness, but I don't like basketball. So let's continue on with the rest of our conversation, all right? So this all being said, those are the numbers. It will get clearer as we get more data in, and we'll keep tracking and keep watching and see what's going on. But we've been doing this original storyline of the history of Arizona, a snapshot of the history of Arizona. It all started when Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Now, this has been very good for Ray because it gave me things to talk about for 4 weeks now, 5 weeks now it's been going on. It's been very bad for Russian soldiers who thought they were going to be home by Easter because you ain't going home, guys. All right, you were in for the long, hard slog because the Ukrainian people decided, hey, we ain't dealing with that. So, yay team. But we're talking about Mexico. And now we're going to be officially talking about Mexico and not New Spain. Right. Up until now, through all these conversations we've been discussing, we've been talking about the Spanish colonizing the southwestern United States, colonizing Mexico, and pretty much a lot of the Western Hemisphere. And we worked through the various expeditions of conquistadors running around various parts of Arizona, establishing ranches, establishing missions, establishing presidios, and trying to get some semblance of control over the land that is today Arizona. In 1776, all right, our forefathers signed the Declaration of Independence and kicked off this whole craziness in the Western Hemisphere, all right, with the American War of Independence. And we all know this. We all pay attention. If nothing else, we wander out and try to figure out what's all the fireworks and loud explosions going on July 4th. And this had residual effects throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. The other major colonial power at the time, there's two going on. There was France, and there was Spain. And Spain had the bulk of land under its... Oh, and Portugal down in the Brazil area. But Spain had the bulk of everything. It appears to me, doing this reading and having not gone into great detail and depth of it, is that one of the fundamental differences between land that had been immigrated to and colonized by England and land that had been colonized by Spain had a lot to do with the fundamental philosophies when it came to colonization. Spain was incredibly top-down. In New England, the central colonies and the southern colonies, in English colonies, they had individual colonies in commonwealths. You had Virginia as a standalone. Right? You had Georgia as a standalone. You had Massachusetts as a standalone. These were started with individual charters. All right, an individual explorer would get a charter from the king, all right, and that's why William Penn gets to found Pennsylvania. In Spain, I'm not seeing anything like that. It's just like they were treating all of New Spain as one big territory, all run by the same viceroy, right, who was appointed by Spain. And because of that, you had a much more unified polity. Right? But what you didn't have is you did not have as much local control as the the English colonies did. This is just my hypothesis right now. But is because of the Viceroy of New Spain, and these things were all built around Mexico City, it seems like a whole bunch of power in New Spain was centered on Mexico City instead of being disseminated out to the various colonial capitals. And if that's not just a great argument for federalism right there, I don't know what it is. But the problem with one of these top-down scenarios is when you get decapitated, you're going to have a bad day. And Spain itself got itself decapitated by this individual we know as Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon Bonaparte took over the French Revolution after the French revolted against their kings, inspired by the American Revolution. You see what we caused? We just kicked over this entire anthill. Right? Anybody who's watched Les Mis knows somewhat of how this whole thing happens. Right? And like every good revolution, you always wind up on that thin line of, are we going to go crazy? Or are we going to go solid? Right? France definitely went crazy. I don't care what people say about it. Right? That's where the guillotine comes up. And the guillotine starts with, okay, first we're going to lop off the royals' heads. Right? And then it's going to go, we're going to lop off the heads of anybody we don't like. Napoleon Bonaparte comes in and manages to secure power in revolutionary France. Right? And proclaim himself Emperor of France, right? So, hey, really interesting, right? We just got rid of these royals, and now we have an emperor. Cool. So, Napoleon Bonaparte, as he's running around through Europe, and invading various countries. At one point, takes over Spain, all right, and runs the Spanish kings out. These are the same kings, the same monarchy that had been developing all of New Spain and everything else. The Napoleon Bonaparte then at the time appoints his brother-in-law to be king of Spain. And that created sort of a mini revolution, mini civil war throughout all the Spanish holdings, especially in New Spain, because the locals in New Spain did not recognize this upstart, this guy, this brother-in-law. I mean, and you can almost really sort of sit there. It's like when you think of the stereotypical brother-in-law, right? It's that guy, right? He gets in charge of Spain, and so, New Spain decides now might be a really good time to revolt, because it's not like the local leaders, the viceroy, who may or may not like the new king, all right, can call back on Spain for support, because guess what? Spain's being overrun, all right, by the French. There's a whole bunch of things called the Peninsular Campaign. That's where Wellington made his bones, was fighting on the Peninsular Campaign. That's where we get the word guerrilla warfare, all right, which is Spanish for little war. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of this whole thing, when you have that top-down system of control and the top just got lopped off, all sorts of crazy shit's going to happen. So Mexican War of Independence kicks off in 1810. Note the time periods, and there's so much overlap going on, right? Because 1810, you have, the Napoleonic Wars going on in Europe. We get into our little war called the War of 1812, which is just a sideshow of the Napoleonic Wars during this time period. You also have the American purchase, the Louisiana Purchase from France, from Napoleon, right? Which, strangely enough, the only reason why he sold the Louisiana Purchase is because he had lost control of a couple islands in the Caribbean. That all of the Louisiana Purchase was supposed to supply food to these islands, so those islands could concentrate on growing sugar. It's all wheels and wheels, plans within plans, spinning into infinity. So America's picked up the Louisiana Purchase. All right, we're having the War of 1812 kicking off. All right, but in 1810, Mexican War of Independence comes up as the rebellion against Spanish control. And mostly what it was is, I think a lot of, you got to remember, Mexico at the time had a very stratified culture, with Indians and slaves at the bottom. There were mixed races in there. I keep coming across the term Creole. And I think in the traditional aspect of Creole, that either meant a mixed race or somebody who was of Spanish descent but was not born in Spain. Because at the very top of the hierarchy, of course, was the king. All right, and then right underneath that was Spanish people who were born on the peninsula. Now, track that as being a little weird. The concept of we're both Spanish. All right, both of my parents were born in Spain. They move to Mexico City. Meet, fall in love, have me, and I grow up descendant of two Spaniards. Right? But I'm not considered as Spaniard as you, because your exact same scenario meant that when you came out the chute, you were born in Spain itself. The very fact that I was not born on holy ground of Spain meant I'm not equal to you in status. And that means jobs, that means education, that means everything. Right? So when the revolution kicks off, it's those guys. It's not necessarily the downtrodden peoples working out there on the farms and stuff like that who are rising up in revolts. It's really that second tier down. Hey, I speak Spanish as good as you. I might have even gone back to Spain, gone to the same schools, but for some reason, because I dropped here and you dropped over there, right? You're treating me like dirt. So, and now that we've just knocked off the top, hey, game on. So, the Mexican War of Independence goes on for a very long time. It goes on for 11 years. Right? And Spain itself did not actually recognize Mexican independence, all right, until the signing of Santa Maria Calatrava, sounds about right, treaty, in 1836. Right? But eventually what happens is they wind up kicking the Spanish out of Mexico and Central America and Southwest America. All right. And they kick them out. And what's the first thing they do after this? Right? They've officially gotten rid of the king, and they turn around and they immediately appoint an emperor. All right? Just before you scoff, just remember they did offer George Washington the crown. Right? George Washington said, "No, we're not doing that. We no royalty here. We're going to go republic." George Washington could have established the Washington monarchy. All right? So imagine how life would be different then. So Mexico throws off Spanish rule, creates what's called the Empire of Mexico. All right, the Mexican Empire, which rules from, don't have exactly the time frame here, 1821 to 1822 seems to be a number on that. Right? And you can tell by the numbers, all right, by the dates, 1821 to 1822. It did not last long because he was immediately disposed. But we have multiple little wars going on through this entire time. All right, Mexico in this time period is pretty much, there's just little flare-ups all over the place. Various Indian tribes are flaring up right and left on the place. You have this term for individuals called a filibusterer. Right? Filibuster is not a blowhard, right, speaking in the Senate for an unusual amount of time. What a filibuster is that it's a job description. It's like Vikings, a job description, right? What a filibuster would do is they would wander into a country and try to take it over and make it theirs. Rudyard Kipling, the man who would be king. Right? So during the middle of this entire Mexican War of Independence, you also have what's called the Long Expedition, where Texas filibusters had tried to carve off a piece of Texas for themselves. Right? And the Mexican rebels went up there and squished that while fighting off the Spanish at the same time. Right? You have wars with the Comanche. Right? You have another attempt, all right, soon afterwards by Spain to reconquer Mexico. Right? You have Apache Mexican wars. You have the Yaqui wars, which is a tribe that was borderline on the northern border. Right? And let's see. Multiple battles against the remnants of the Mayans, Comanche, Pueblo still. The northern border, the part that makes up Arizona at this time period, is really, really, I don't want to say the Wild West because that's been done to death. It is the borderlands. All right? There is fundamentally, the central government in Mexico City has drawn an imaginary line that they've gotten all the other powers to regulate. But if you actually walked into that territory and said, what does this territory belong to? The person you talk to, odds are, and let's say we're a missionary or at this point a Mexican soldier, would say, oh no, this belongs to the Apache, this belongs to the Hopi, this belongs to the, the Comanche, this belongs to me. So remember that about this area as we move along in the history thing. Soon after, the Emperor of Mexico, and his name was Iturbide, completely butchering that pronunciation. Soon after he is installed by popular acclaim to be the emperor, this man kicks off, and we'll hear his name over and over and over again, all right, by the name of Santa Anna. All right, Santa Anna, all right, and depending on whose history you're reading, basically kicks off a little fight with Spain and starts his own revolution to get rid of one of his rivals. Right? And this kicks off a thing called the Casamata Plan Revolution. Right? It results in what's considered a Republican victory, beating over the imperial power. Right? And that is when the emperor abdicates his role as emperor. Right? And you get a true republic, air quote true, republic in Mexico. This starts the entire concept of, where true republican government starts coming. And they have a provisional government that kicks off for a couple of years, right? In 1823, the provisional government is the government that is ruling out of Mexico City. At this point, most of Mexico just breaks down and they're like, various uprisings happen. I'm looking at least 4 right here. There's a rebellion of Oaxaca, rebellion of Guadalajara, a rebellion of Puebla, and there's a revolt of Querétaro. The problem with trying to pronounce Spanish is I keep trying to say Spanish with a Japanese accent. It doesn't work out really well. In these, the provisional government's managed to establish control over it. So now we have an actual considered Mexican government kick in. You have a tentative first attempt at a Texas revolution, all right, called the Fredonian Rebellion. Bunch of Texan rebels, mostly Europeans, mostly coming in from the United States area, come in from that filibuster concept again. Tries to have themselves a little land grab and whatnot. They ally with the existing Comanche tribes, and then the Comanche tribes, halfway through the Fredonian Rebellion, jump sides and decides to go with Mexico. That is one of those things I could just definitely just dive in for the next 3.5 hours, but we're not going to go on. We're going to skip that. At one point, there's a coup goes on in the Mexican government. That happens in 1829. Goes on until 1831, where the liberals and conservatives are having themselves a little civil war. Right? The liberal, I believe on that one, the conservatives oust the liberal president and take over. Right? You also have this thing going on where right in the middle of Mexico, there is a Zacatecas rebellion, kicks off at 1835. All right, and at the same time, now we get the actual Texas Revolution, and this is where we're going to wrap this all up. Depending on whose history you read about the Texas Revolution, there's one thing that both sides can agree on. It happened, all right, and at the end of the day, Texas captures Santa Anna. And this is after Santa has taken over the Alamo. He's just pretty much marching through Texas, just, having a grand old time, winning wars and slaughtering the people who surrender. And he gets captured, and he signs, the treaty recognizing the Treaty of Velasco in 1836 creates the Republic of Texas. Yay, Texas. Right? This is the creation of the Republic of Texas in 1836 leaves a lot on the tables, and a lot of the borders are not really quite clearly delineated. Right? This is going to give us the setup, right, for the Mexican-American War. Right? Now, you have the Rio Grande, which is currently the border in Texas, right? But at the point before, there was another river farther north, and there was enough questioning of which river is going to be actually the border, which is going to lead us into the Mexican-American War. But my main takeaways I want people to understand with this history here is, unlike in the U.S., when we had our revolution and we had, these individual colonies forming, the republic, all right? In Mexico, because you had that top down, everything came out of Mexico City. That individual area, right, did not feel like they were getting the love and affection that they needed, or the support, or whatever, from these mindless people in Capital City who are just constantly coming at us for taxes and tribute. That's why you have all of these contingent. There was, unbeknownst to a lot of Americans, right, 2 or 3 times there where New England, right, almost seceded from the Union. Right? It was because New Englanders had a completely different approach about how they wanted the federal government to be. They wanted a lot more top-down authority going on. They wanted more of a Mexico City look, right, than the southern and the western states did at the time. So there was a couple times it was, sort of, hey, are we going to suddenly lose Massachusetts because they're going to secede from the Union? And up to that point, most of New England said, yeah, we have the right to leave any time. It's right there in the Constitution. But it's that fact that the lands that the United States of America, even though they did not start being colonized as late or as early as, the Spanish New Spain area got colonized, they did have a lot more cohesiveness, even being independent colonies at the time. All right, ratified underneath, their original. I can't remember what the original name is. It's not Articles of Incorporation, but the original charter before the Constitution kicks in. Mexico just doesn't have that. And you have all these individual little areas. And I really wanted to get the point across to this whole thing is that the area that we now know as Arizona, right, was not as populated and not under federal control as any area that would have been being owned by the United States of America at the same time as we go into the Mexican-American War in our next episode. So, well, this is going to wrap this one up. Next week we are going to definitely cover the Mexican-American War and then wrap this series up and be done with this whole thing and off to something crazy. We got... hopefully Tina's going to be talking on Monday so we can see what her take is on, what the Federal Reserve statements were of today. And we will continuing on. So you guys have a really great weekend. Continue to work your circles. And I'll see you guys next week. Thank you much for watching.
Is that a bird? Pepper. Oh, who's that? Go get it. Go get the cookies. There's more cookies. Get the cookies.